On a visit to Russia, the leader of Hamas lashes out at the US and is pessimistic about the prospects of Middle East peace. But there are signs that Russia is stepping up its involvement in the region. What role could it play in kickstarting a stalled process? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. This week, Hamas leader Khaled Meshaal has been in Moscow. He's met the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and his visit's been closely watched by all parties involved in the Middle East peace process. At a news conference, Meshaal said Hamas wanted to reconcile with rival Palestinian group Fatah and blamed the US for preventing this from happening. He also said he believes Israel is planning further military action in the region. Israel, for its part, has strongly objected to the talks in Moscow with what it labels a terrorist group. Russia is part of the Middle East Quartet, along with the US, the UN and the EU. But it's the only one prepared to hold public discussions with Hamas. And Khaled Meshaal has praised what may be an increasing Russian engagement in the Middle East, insisting that the agenda should not be driven only by the US and Israel.
That is why we emphasize to the Russian leadership that what is needed is not just resuming formal negotiations that suits the American administration's and Netanyahu's tactics, but also to resume talks that would lead to real peace and end the occupation, secure the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people.
Meshaal went on to criticize European countries for what he considers a policy of appeasement towards the Israeli government.
The third reason for the current deadlock in the Middle East talks is the failure of the international community and of the European countries to force Israel into abiding by its previous peace commitments.
Well, joining us today to discuss this issue further, from Moscow we're joined by Osama Hamdan. He's the Hamas representative in Lebanon and part of the delegation to Russia. In Moscow, Vyacheslav Matuzos, a former Russian diplomat, and in London, Claire Spencer, head of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Let's begin with Osama Hamdan. What was the primary focus of the talks?
I have to say that the talks focused on three main issues. The first one, the Palestinian reconciliation, where the Russian minister expressed their worry about what is going on, and they asked deeply and thoroughly about the reconciliation. We explained our position, saying that there is no problems. The only problem is the interference from the United States and Israel. The second issue was the peace process, where we said that there is no real expectations for creating a peace with a government led by Netanyahu and Barak, including Lieberman. The third issue was the relations between Hamas and Moscow, and it seems that Moscow is trying to play a role in the region by having contacts with all the players in the region, while the United States and most of the European countries are not willing to have the same role creating or building relations with Hamas.
Well, let's stay in Moscow and speak to Vyacheslav Matuzos on that first issue there, the issue of relationships between Hamas and Fatah. Can Russia play a role in affecting a rapprochement that others have not been able to?
Yes, of course. Russia can play a very positive role in reconciliation of Palestinian wars and Palestinian movement, because today we are facing a very disastrous situation on Palestinian soil, on Palestinian side, because of splitting in two factions, Hamas and Fatah, create an unnatural situation on, that reflects on peaceful process. First of all, they give all the Israeli government the right to choose to whom they are talking to. If they are applying to Mahmoud Abbas and saying him, you are not the sole and legitimate, you are legitimate but not enough, and you are not a sole representative of Palestinian people, and they reject any negotiations with Hamas movement today. But I think that this situation is the main subject of, for Palestinians themselves, first of all, because without reconciliation, I think that there is no other chances to reconstruct a peaceful process.
Well, let's go to Claire Spencer on that point, the issue of reconciliation as a fundamental building block in an exceedingly complicated process.
Yes, it is. I think a number of us, certainly observers, have seen that any attempt to involve only part of the Palestinians, whether led by Abu Mazen or others based in the West Bank in Ramallah or Jerusalem alone, without Gaza and the role that Hamas plays there being taken into consideration, will only be half a solution. If you leave Gaza out of the equation, you're not going to have a solution. So the prerequisite does have to be a reconciliation of all sides within the Palestinian territories so that they can negotiate a final status agreement as a whole.
Well, we have a situation where Russia, apparently the only player prepared to talk to Hamas within those bodies attempting to effect a resumption of the Middle East peace process. Is this going to change, Claire Spencer?
Well, I think what Russia is doing is actually filling a void where now, as we see certainly over the last few days, both the US and Europe are now once again preoccupied with how to manage the Iranian announcement of nuclear enrichment. This is what's taking up diplomatic energy. And it seems for a long time their eye is off the ball in terms of how to restructure a negotiating process, what the conditions for this are going to be. The US, as we know, insisted on cessation of settlement activity on the Israeli side, but they haven't really followed through with this. This has been dropped. There's a very serious situation building in Jerusalem where there are tensions on both sides, and this is not a static situation. So the Russians do have an opportunity, as indeed does Turkey, another player in the field, to actually move into this void where there is very little apparent diplomatic activity that's going to result in anything if Hamas is left out of the equation.
Well, let's bookmark the issue of Iran and go back to Osama Hamdan. And the question to you is, how important is the question of international recognition for Hamas? Is it easier for Hamas to take part in reconciliation processes and perhaps in a wider resolution of the Middle East issue?
Well, I have to say that Hamas participated in the elections and it gains the legitimacy from its own people. If the international community decide not to deal with Hamas, it will complicate the issues, it will not solve any problems. For the last 4 years, there was more complications under the terms of or the conditions of the quartet. It did not achieve any goal. They just put the Palestinian people under the siege, they created the division, they kept the division between the Palestinians, and now they could not solve the problem, they could not deliver the peace for the Palestinians. So if someone wants to talk about an end for the problem of the Middle East, he has to talk about talking directly to the Palestinians, asking the Palestinians directly from their own elected leadership what they really want. Without putting conditions, without having preterms, because this will complicate the issues rather than solving any problem. If you want to deal with the Palestinians, you have to deal with them as they are. Don't try to shape them. This will damage the whole process.
But let's stick with the role at the moment of Hamas's position in this and ask Vyacheslav Matuzos, can Hamas do more to engage in the wider process?
Well, you know, there are appearance on international scene. Hamas is two sides. First of all, for reconciliation of Palestinians. And the second thing, if Hamas will become a partner in negotiations, just behind the Fatah and PLO organization and a Palestinian authority that are participating now. It is, I don't exclude that maybe it will come some time when Hamas will be recognized as a sole and legitimate representative of Palestinian people. In this case, and under Hamas is control only Gaza Strip. In this case, I think that will be a discussion not on Palestinian state in all Palestinian in 67 frontiers, 67 a year time, but only on frontiers of Gaza Strip. And if it will be restricted, Palestinian state by Gaza Strip at the head of Hamas, maybe it will be supported by Israeli and the quartet. And I don't think that it will be the good solution. So, praising Hamas, we should understand clearly that our praising Hamas based not on supporting idea of separatist statehood in Gaza Strip, but solution of all sides of Palestinian problem. And first of all, Jerusalem, Eastern Jerusalem problem, and Western Bank, and all Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and other countries, Arab countries.
Well, let's continue to broaden it out. Let's continue to broaden it out. And we've already touched upon the issue that this is just the latest in what appears to be an increasing Russian engagement in the Middle East, which could culminate in an all-party conference, though no date has yet been suggested. Last month, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas visited Moscow. Importantly, he held direct talks with the Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, as opposed to Meshaal's engagement at foreign minister level. They discussed the possibility of restarting peace talks, as well as ongoing Russian aid to the Palestinians. And then, on Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu begins his first official visit to Russia. Among his points of discussion will be Israeli concerns about Iran's nuclear program. And Iran is another area where Russia has been using its powerful influence. Until now, Moscow has been pivotal in attempting to mediate and negotiate a conclusion to the international dispute over Iran's uranium enrichment efforts. And while at this stage still publicly opposed to sanctions, Russia has sent signals that this policy is not absolute. Claire Spencer in London, we started with a question of one building block in terms of relationships between Fatah and Hamas, but there appears to be a much wider environment in which the process as a whole can take place.
Yes, there is some talk that Russia has actually made as a condition of its going ahead with another round of sanctions against Iran, then indeed it will be allowed to play a larger role in the Middle East peace process. In other words, since the beginning of this decade, since 2001, it's been a member of the so-called quartet, which is made up of the UN, the EU, the United States and Russia. But this was at the time the roadmap was launched for the peace process. As we know, that went nowhere. It was overtaken by the Annapolis process. But Russia is very attached to the roadmap and its principles, and I think would like to use this occasion to say, look, this process, as led almost exclusively, and the quartet being dominated by the US, is no longer suitable for the urgent times we live in. In other words, there are other players, and Russia is putting itself forward, who, because, as you've said, they have links with everyone in the region and are not imposing the kind of rigid preconditions that others are, who can actually make some headway. So this may be one way forward, and it would not necessarily be inimical to US interests in the region, but it would slightly overtake them. It would change the balance of weight, the balance of influence a bit, which is interesting.
Vyacheslav Smatuzos, do you see Russia's particular position in the wider political sphere, particularly with the relations with Iran, as a critical factor in it playing a broader role in a specific resolution of the Middle East situation?
I don't think that Russia watching Iranian dossier in connection with Middle East solution. First of all, because for Russia, interest, national interest, Iranian dossier, nuclear dossier, is more important even nationally, because it on its frontiers directly, Caspian Sea and Iran, and it is a strategic problem. And Palestinian-Israeli negotiation process is aside of this sphere of interest of Russia. I don't think that the two problems are so closely connected with each other. I think that Russia is not reluctant to give the United States chance to make more initiative in quartet, for example, because I consider that Russians understand very clearly the difficulty of task any side that apply upon this, itself this mission to achieve peaceful solution of Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because not a single country, state capable to achieve results. Only common efforts, Russian, American, European, United Nations, can push a peaceful process ahead. If the United States wants to be a leader in this quartet, please take this leadership, but you know that you will be in deadlock in the say, because not a lone country can achieve the results. Only common, joint efforts can be productive.
Let's ask Osama Hamdan to pick up on that particular point.
American leading role.
An approximation, an approach to a resolution, how widespread is it? Would a greater Russian role, from your point of view, help ease the process, help fill what might be a vacuum at this stage?
Well, I believe the problem of the process was not the Palestinian side or the Arab side, it was the Israeli side. The Russian rule will clarify that clearly, and it will show the other partners in the quartet that recognizing Hamas and the Palestinian results of the elections, negotiating on the legitimate rights of the Palestinians, making pressure on Israel, this will bring us to a solution. Without that, I believe there will be no solution. The Russian role in the region is important because the United States, as an only player now, an only international player, it can accept all what the Israelis are asking, looking for. You can watch what had happened between Obama and Netanyahu. There was no freeze for building the settlements. Netanyahu make his own pressure on Obama. Obama fall down. He couldn't make any improvement for the situation. I believe the Russian role will be helpful for the Palestinians. It will be helpful for more understanding and acceptance for the situation in the region as it is, and dealing with the real facts on the ground, not dealing with what they only want or what the Israelis want.
We've heard the position that all parties must be involved in this process. We've talked as well about the importance of recognition, in particular recognition of Hamas. Osama Hamdan, does Hamas perhaps have a responsibility to consider recognition of another partner in this process, which would be Israel?
Well, I have to say clearly, the Palestinian reconciliation is not willing to recognize Israel, because there was a recognition, a Palestinian recognition for Israel from Fatah and the PLO, but this recognition was worthless. It didn't give the Palestinians anything. It gave the Israelis a recognition, while till now there is no recognition for the Palestinian rights. There is no solution for the Palestinians. Every day they cut more from the legitimate rights of the Palestinians. I believe the problem is not the recognition of Israel. The problem is the recognition of the Palestinian rights, the definition of those rights, and the commitment from the international community towards those rights. This is the problem. Hamas will not recognize Israel unless there is a real solution giving the Palestinian people their legitimate rights. Then the Palestinian people will decide whether they will accept that or not. But Hamas, from its own side, I think we clarified that position for the last 4 years, saying Hamas will not recognize Israel.
Claire Spencer, we do know that argument that the recognition of Israel is an end and not the beginning of the process. But specifically Russia, do you think that it is in a position to break what is an absolute deadlock, and that is just one of recognizing who is involved in the process?
Well, I think the key problem, and one that the European Union would like to see resolved, particularly speaking from a European perspective, is who is it who represents the Palestinians? And it would be a lot easier if there was an agreement between Hamas and Fatah. And I think, having seen Khaled Meshaal's statements after meeting with the foreign minister, he made it pretty clear that, in fact, this is a role more for the Egyptians. It's the Egyptians who've been leading this process. Obviously, they don't want to sour relations with the Egyptians in getting closer to the Russians. And it's not really the Russians who are going to be able to broker the peace, if you like, on the Palestinian side. So I think the urgent matter has to be in the hands of the Palestinians themselves to actually come to some kind of agreement between Fatah and Hamas. And then they'll be collectively in a much stronger position then to move forward towards a process of negotiation with the Israeli side. At the moment, the fact there is no agreement, frankly, is giving everyone, whether it's Europeans or the US, and indeed Israel, an excuse for not recognizing Hamas as a legitimate partner. Whereas if there was a unified Palestinian partner to engage with, which includes Hamas, then I'm sure Russia would be at the front line of supporting this, and others, I suspect, on the European side, and some have indicated that they would accept that Hamas has a role within a larger Palestinian representation.
Vyacheslav Matusos, so we have the opinion that Palestinian division is a huge stumbling block to restart any form of process whatsoever.
That's correct. I can remind that Palestinians face such kind of problems not for the first time in its history of Palestinian movement. I watch Palestinian movement from 70s, about 40 years. I remember very well Palestinian splits in Lebanon during civil war in Lebanon. After withdrawal Yasser Arafat from Lebanon, 88, the National Congress of Palestinian PNC in Algiers. I was there, the only foreign representative inside this PNC that proclaimed Palestinian independent state. So I remember very well about these factions. They were struggling, but any time any struggle was finalized in unity. They kept their unity, and after they kept their unity, they achieved their goals, political achievements. 88, they achieved a unity after withdrawal, after quarrel in Lebanon. After that Madrid begins some Oslo negotiations and results that proclaimed giving something to Palestinian people.
Last question to Osama Hamdan on that particular subject, and what we've heard very clearly is that other parties have a responsibility, but perhaps the primary responsibility as a start point is Palestinian groups achieving some form of reconciliation and unity. Is this possible, Osama Hamdan? Is this close?
Well, I have to say, if there was no American and Israeli interference, this reconciliation will happen tomorrow. We are working to have this as soon as we can. And I believe there was a Palestinian government at 2006, 2007, but there was no recognition for Hamas and for the Palestinian rights. So the problem came from outside, not from inside. I agree that we have responsibility as Palestinians, but there is also a responsibility on the international community who did not try to help. They worked against the Palestinian will. They did not recognize the results of the elections. They supported the Israeli aggression on Gaza and on West Bank. So they have their responsibilities towards undermining the peace and undermining the Palestinian situation. Anyway, I'm not blaming anyone. I think we as Palestinians, we have to work to have our reconciliation back, and then we can define our political program to struggle against the occupation, having the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people.
Reconciliation, then, a crucial integration of part of Russia's attempts to enlarge its involvement in the Middle East process. Many thanks to our guests, Claire Spencer in London, Osama Hamdan and Vyacheslav Matusos in Moscow. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.